Hey everyone, it's Rodney Barnes here. I'm pulling back the curtain a little bit. I get a lot of questions about how this show came to be and where all these stories came from. Well, today I'm giving you the real answers. We're starting with how these stories got into my head in the first place. And it all begins with my grandmother. So let me tell you about that, and a few other things you probably didn't know about me and this show. Let's dive in. Well, everything with Run Fool begins and ends with my grandmother. When I was a kid, we watched movies together, horror movies together. She told me scary stories. It was normal for me, and it was a bonding experience because I'm an only child. Got a lot of half-brothers and sisters, but raised primarily by my grandmother. And she was an instrumental part of my love for horror and fantasy and all of these things. There were only 3 channels at the time. We didn't go to the movies. We watched a lot of this stuff, creature features, late Saturday nights. On Channel 5, back in the D.C. area, they used to show movies on Sunday mornings. So after church, we would come back. We would have this wonderful time in church, and then we would come back and watch vampires and monsters and different things. And it was just the warmest experience. And I think I didn't look at some of the other aspects of my life that weren't exactly perfect because I had her. So in a lot of ways, this show is a tribute to my appreciation and love for her and my appreciation and love for horror. So I grew up loving the Universal monsters and the Hammer films of old, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, that stuff. I always loved reading horror. I remember books like The Amityville Horror and The Shining, anything by Stephen King. All of that stuff resonated with me. Comic books. I used to put together these monster, I think the company was Aurora. They had these werewolf, Frankenstein, Dracula models that you had to put together. They would glow in the dark. It's funny, I just saw the Salem's Lot remake, and they had those same models in the background. It took me back to my childhood. But always loved it like in a 3-dimensional way. And I wasn't just waiting for a movie to come out or a TV show. I lived it. You know, I had a comic book in my pocket or a paperback book. It was always a part of my life. And whether I was going through good times, bad times, through various periods, there was always something to do with horror, fantasy, science fiction in my life. So I don't think it's any surprise that as an adult, I'm still immersed in it and still love it and still passionate about it. In regards to the stories we tell on Run Fool, there's a certain math. You know, I've always wanted the heart of the story to walk in lockstep with the horror. Like, it's not so much having a lesson at the end, but I really want you to care about the characters. I want you to care about what's happening in the story, not just what's happening in the story, not just the monsters, not just the scary stuff, but the people who are going through it. Again, I look at it more as empathy than anything else. If you can empathize with characters and maybe see yourself in them, I think it makes for a more satisfying story. You get it in a lot of character-driven stories, the Stephen King stuff that I've loved. You just feel like if I'm watching The Shining, I care about Jack Torrance and the family, and I want to see the family come together, even though in a lot of ways they're coming apart because of the ghosts. In Run Fool, we do a similar thing. Oftentimes, a character can have the best of intentions, but travel down a path that leads them into a place of despair. So, very simple math, but I think one of the great things our writers have been able to do is to capture that essence of heart to where you feel like it's a lesson in the end. But more often than not, it's more about heart than anything else. Coming from a place of never having done this before creatively, you know, I've written a bunch of stories and I've told a bunch of stories through the mouths of actors, but I'd never actually been a person who had done podcasts myself. So there was a learning curve for me. And our writers and producing team and all of the folks involved who have a lot more experience in this and are professionals to the highest order helped me create that learning curve. I think if you listen to the first episodes of the season and you get to the last episodes, you'll see a difference. And that difference more often than not is them guiding me, teaching me, being patient with me along the way, even when sometimes I may not have deserved it. They've helped me become better at doing this. So any of the positives of season 1, I attribute to our great team. As far as my favorite episodes, I'd say Black Aggie, any of the ones that deal with my grandmother and me. They speak to, again, the heart of what Run Fool is. It's an emotional experience, and I think you can hear it in my voice when we hit those moments that help bring a sense of sentiment, that remind me of when I was going through a period of my life, that touch upon the reality of the show. Those episodes that resonate that idea are the ones that hit me the hardest and the ones that I enjoy the most. Our tale begins somewhere near Gallup, New Mexico. It's a small sun-baked town off historic Route 66, littered with roadside motels sitting in the shadows of sandstone cliffs. I was 10 hours from L.A. and hell-bent to finish the drive in one go. There was just one problem. It was already nighttime. So I stopped at a payphone and called my grandmother. You see, I promised Grandma I'd ring her at the end of each drive. And because I didn't dare cross the woman, I did so dutifully every night. Like always, she was waiting for my call. And when I told her where I was, she asked the usual questions. Did I get something to eat? Yes, Grandma. Is your tank full? Yes, Grandma. Got a place for the night? It was here I told my grandmother one of the few lies I'd ever told her in my life. I said I was crashing at some roadside motel and I'd get an early start in the morning. She was pleased with that answer. Then before we hung up, she told me what she always did. Be smart, Rodney. You come home safe. To this day, I'm not sure if it was me she didn't trust or the rest of the world. Turns out, it should have been both. I got in my old GMC Sonoma and soon there was nothing in front of me but asphalt melting into the black horizon. I was in no man's land. I rolled down my windows and let the night air rush past my ears. I felt like the king of the desert, so I decided to go fast, real fast. 70, 80, 90. Before I knew it, my poor truck was pushing 100 miles an hour. I hollered into the wind when something ahead caught my eye. There was a person on the side of the road, just standing there. When I turned to get a better look, they were gone, like some kind of mirage. I shook my head and set my sights back on the road. The desert was weird, man. Just then, something gray darted into my path. I slammed the brakes and my tires squealed as the car spun out. An eternity passed as my short life flashed before my eyes. When finally, the vehicle skidded to a stop. There, lit up in my headlights, like a spotlight on some strange ethereal stage, was a coyote. The creature stood still, just feet from my car as I caught my breath. It wasn't fazed at all. It just gave me a withering look, then sauntered off into the inky night. My hands were shaking as I steered back onto the road. I decided I needed a distraction, something to keep my mind off what could have been. So I turned on the stereo. Not to date myself, but in those days there were no MP3s or CDs. And forget about Bluetooth, so that left the radio. In the boonies, in the middle of the night, there wasn't much on the air. I turned my dial, getting nothing but static and garbled church hymns, until a man's placid voice crackled into focus. He said,
"You're listening to Nighthawk AM. Tonight's story is about Bigfoot."
Nighthawk was the late-night radio show for the strange and unexplained. Long before the internet, people could tune in to hear about conspiracies, cryptid encounters, ghosts, demons, you name it. If it was weird, they'd put it on the air. Now, some folks believe in that kind of stuff, but at the time I wasn't one of them. Despite growing up on my grandma's strange tales, I was a proud skeptic. But whether I admitted it or not, there was always a small voice inside me that whispered, maybe I didn't know everything like I thought. Perhaps that's why I listened to the show. It had the special ability to thrill and chill you, even just for a little while. And after all, that's why you're here, isn't it? Anyway, the radio did the trick. I let the calm, matter-of-fact voice of the show's host wash over me as he chatted with a self-proclaimed time traveler. I was riveted, but just as things were getting good, I lost the signal. midnight, and I'd truly just entered the middle of nowhere. Have you ever been in the desert past dusk? You don't know nighttime until you have. That's where it gets darkest. That true black, where you look out of the window and all that stares back at you is your own reflection. I felt like I was driving straight into the abyss, and if things couldn't get any worse, it started raining. I flipped my wipers on and slowed down, and just as I turned the bend, I saw it again. A person. I blinked hard, but this time it was no mirage. There was a flesh and blood man on the side of the road, and as I peered out of my windshield in disbelief, he stuck out his thumb. This dude wanted a ride. I don't know what came over me then. This wasn't the 70s when no one gave a second thought to picking up strangers on the side of the road. But remember, I'd been driving for 14 hours straight. I wasn't exactly thinking clearly, which was kind of the point. If I didn't want to fall asleep, I needed something drastic. And well, this fit the bill. So I pulled over and rolled down my window. He was a young guy, scrappy looking, but smaller than me, and I took comfort in that. I asked if he needed a ride west, and the next thing I knew, he was in the passenger seat. The first thing I noticed was his smell. It wasn't bad exactly, but it was distinct, like damp earth and something sharper I couldn't place. Then there were his eyes. They were deep-set and intense, as gray and electric as storm clouds. He thanked me for the lift and thrust out his hand. "Mickey," he said. I shook it as I introduced myself and almost flinched. His skin was cold as ice. I asked Mickey if he had been out in the rain long, and he nodded. He said it felt like an eternity waiting out there. He was lucky I drove by. Maybe we're both lucky, he smiled. He had no address for his destination. He'd just direct me further down the road. And he had no luggage, which he explained was because he was local. How you can be local to miles of wild, empty desert, he never said. Still, I was grateful for the company. Between the rain and my own tired mind, I was beginning to feel like I was blending into that desert landscape. It was refreshing to have another living, breathing person next to me, even if he wasn't much of a talker. For the next 10 miles, we rode in silence with nothing but the rhythm of my windshield sweeping away the rain. I wished the radio worked so I could drown out the uneasy silence. But there was still nothing but that awful static. Not even Nighthawk AM. So I asked Mickey if he believed in time travel. Mickey said he didn't know about time machines and all that, but he did believe in crossing dimensions. Like you can cross borders on a highway, he supposed there were special places where you could pass through some hidden boundary between past and present, life and death, even heaven and hell. A chill rushed through me. This guy hardly said 10 words since he got in my car, and now he was waxing poetic about interdimensional time travel. But I did ask, didn't I? Once again, I changed the subject. Why was he hitchhiking anyway? Did he get stranded? Mickey smiled.
I guess you could say that.
He explained he always felt that way. Stranded. He lived in these parts a long time and was always itching to get out. But try as he might, he never really could. I knew that itch well. It was what kept me coming back to LA, trying to carve myself a foothold so I could get out of Maryland for good. But every time a job ended, I was right back where I started, Annapolis. And for an ambitious kid like me, home felt like purgatory. So I told Mickey I knew exactly what he meant. Finally, we were having a real conversation. But soon, our small talk went south.
You seem sharp, Rod. So what the heck are you doing picking up strangers in the middle of the night? Not very safe, is it?
He was right. I didn't know him. Hell, Mickey may not have even been his real name. I could have picked up some kind of criminal. He could be trying to rob me. My heart dropped to my stomach. Just then, in the periphery of my vision, I saw Mickey reach into his pocket. My body lurched and I swerved hard. Something metallic slipped from Mickey's hand to the floor. He picked it up and I braced myself for the muzzle of a gun or a knife. It was a flask.
Relax.
He took a long swig. I realized then what that smell was from earlier. This man reeked of booze. Suddenly, his off-putting behavior made sense. Everything, I reminded myself, had an explanation. Just as my pulse began to settle, the cabin of the car was flooded with blue and red light. In the rear view, a highway patrol appeared out of nowhere. As I pulled over, Mickey winked at me and slipped the silver flask back in his pocket. I swallowed hard. Seconds later, a pot-bellied trooper strolled up to my open window. Despite my pounding heart and the cop's glaring flashlight, I managed to deliver a cool, "Good evening, officer." Mickey, for his part, gave the cop a small salute. The trooper grunted and explained he pulled me over for erratic driving. He'd just seen me swerve. I was drinking, wasn't I? I froze. Could he smell the booze on Mickey? I assured him I was just on an all-night drive and must have started drifting off. But luckily, I had company. I gestured to Mickey in the passenger seat. The officer looked in his direction and raised an eyebrow. Mickey smiled back. Then, with something like fatherly concern, the cop asked, "Was everything all right? Did I feel all right?" My mind started racing. Should I tell this guy about Mickey? Sure, something was off about the dude, but what would I even say? "Hey officer, this hitchhiker I picked up might be a wanted criminal, but he's probably just drunk. And that open flask in my car? Never seen it in my life." Nah, it was better not to say anything at all. The cop sighed. "You know," he said, "driving tired was just as dangerous as driving drunk. It was easy to fall asleep at the wheel in these parts, especially," he said, "when you were driving by yourself." I figured he was talking about his own late-night drive, but I thanked him regardless. He nodded and disappeared whence he came. Finally, I could breathe. My relief only lasted so long. Once back on the road, I remembered my real problem was sitting beside me in the passenger seat. Mickey gave me a grin that made my skin crawl, then took another pull of his flask. It was then I made a promise to myself. I'd give this drunken weirdo one more chance, but if things got any stranger, I'd ditch his ass the next chance I got. What I think resonates so strongly in the audience is that sense of purpose in our stories. When we talk about loss, grief, the real human stories, when you see that connective tissue of father-son, mother-daughter, marriages, just families in general, just people going through the trials and tribulations of life, I think it becomes a relatable experience. And again, that's our goal. Our goal is to make this show something that when the episode ends, you walk away with a feeling as much as you do a sense of satisfaction. And hopefully that feeling is connected to whatever the theme of an episode is. And again, I can tell as I'm going through the experience of reading them how they land on me. And hopefully they're landing on the audience in the same way. In regards to season 2, I think more of the same thing. You know, America's a big place, and there are a lot of stories, and there are a lot of stories in the nooks and crannies of this country that we want to tell in a way that connects to and builds on what we did in season 1. Again, a lot of heart, a lot of horror, but woven together seamlessly and creating a sense that it's an experience. And every Tuesday, you know, you have something to look forward to that we really, really, really put a lot of work and energy into. And I think as the team comes together, coming off of season 1, we're only getting better, we're only getting closer, and hopefully that'll resonate in the stories. Thanks so much for tuning in and supporting Run Fool every week. We couldn't do it without you, and we've got some really exciting things ahead. Season 2 officially kicks off on November 5th, but before that, we're wrapping up Season 1 with a special hour-long finale airing next week, just in time for Halloween. Now, to give you a little taste of what's to come, here's a sneak peek at our season finale, Earworm, a story that's guaranteed to get under your skin. I just got a weird call, and sorry, I was supposed to record an episode on this haunted doll, but that can wait. Because I just heard let me get my bearings here. I'm rattled if you couldn't tell. I just hung up the phone. No, wait, sorry. Let me backtrack a bit. I've been in the recording studio for, it's gotta be more than 24 hours. Maybe more like a day and a half, something like that. See, we had a lot of run-fool episodes to get through, and I'd fallen behind. So I suggested we knock them all out this weekend. Maybe it's the tortured writer in me, but I love an all-nighter. Feels good to retreat from the world. Leave my life, my friends, family, and just work. Anyways, it's been me, our sound engineer Kevin, and our producer Abakar, here in the booth. No cell phones, no drama, nothing but Doritos, Pepsi, terrifying legends, and a voice in our heads, telling us we have much to do, and not enough time to do it. A few hours ago, I made Abakar go out and get us all some grub, something that wasn't bright orange. He hasn't come back. And before I got this call, I was pissed about that because I was hungry, and it felt like he was wasting our time. But then, the phone in the recording booth rang. I guess it's not a phone exactly, it's one of those intercom things where you can call between studios in the building. There was a man on the other end, a stranger. He sounded almost manic. I don't know if he could hear me, since he kept asking if anyone was there. Seemed like he hoped there was, though, because he kept talking. Told me quite a story. I'm going to need more time than usual to tell you this one. It's not some campfire fright night I can get through in a half hour. It's too big for that. Too irreversible. So I need you to buckle in and stay with me here. You hear that? Kevin just left to see if there's any truth to what this caller said. If there is, it means Abakar isn't coming back. Kevin might not either. Because if what this guy said is true, everyone outside this booth is dead. Thanks again for listening, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. See you next week.